To wrap up chapter 17 and the movements made by the Protestant Reformation, we're going to take a look about how it spread into other parts of Europe outside of Germany. So we're going to take a talk about John Calvin first. John Calvin continued the Reformation after another person in Switzerland named Ulrich Zwingli, who was a Catholic priest and was influenced by the humanist beliefs of Erasmus and the reforms of Luther, started to spread the Protestant ideologies. Now, he had a couple of goals. He called for a more personal faith-based worship, and he wanted the believers to have more control in the church. There was a war in 1531 between Swiss Protestants and Swiss Catholics that did break out. Then you also have, this is where John Calvin comes into play after the Swiss Protestant movements. John Calvin was from France. In 1536, he published a book, The Institutes of the Christian Religion. It expressed ideas about God, salvation, and human nature in general. He believed that men and women are sinful by nature, and Calvin believed that God chooses a select few people to save. He calls these people the elect, or called these people the elect. This became known as the concept of predestination. It's the doctrine that God has decided all things beforehand, including which people will be eternally saved. And followers of this type of belief became known as Calvinists, or Calvinism was the name of the religion based on John Calvin's teachings. Eventually, piggybacking off of Zwingli, Calvin led the Reformation in Switzerland. Calvin believed that the ideal form of government was theocracy. Remember that theocracy is government led by religious figures with religious ideas in mind. Calvin was asked by Protestants in 1541 to come and rule at the city of Geneva, Switzerland. Calvin accepted this offer and ran a very strict city. In the Calvinist world, like things like dancing in public or wearing bright colors, these were things that were frowned upon. Eventually, these ideologies spread into Scotland. John Knox was influenced by Calvin. He put his ideas into play in Scotland, and the followers of John Knox are called Presbyterians. The strict teachings of Calvin were adopted by the Swiss, the Dutch, and the French reformers as well. In France, followers of Calvin were called Huguenots. Huguenots and Catholics didn't get along, and this relationship often led to violence. For example, you have something that will come into play later called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in 1572, in which Catholic mobs began hunting and killing Protestant Huguenots in France. Roman numeral II talks about some of the other Protestant groups that arose, such as the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists believed that you should only baptize people who were old enough to decide on their own to be Christian. They said that people who were baptized as children should then be rebaptized as adults. The church and state should also be separate according to the Anabaptists. They're anti-war, and they influenced the following Protestant groups: Mennonites, Amish, and Quakers, which have some pretty big pockets in the Midwest of the United States. Baptists, also, this is where the term Baptist comes from. It comes from the Anabaptists. The sacrament of Catholic Church, the sacrament of Catholic Church that's similar to these beliefs is confirmation, where you're baptized and then around the age of 13, you confirm that you actually want to be Catholic. So it's a very similar ideology. Women's role in the spread, there's a couple of key figures here. Marguerite of Navarre, she was the sister of the King of France named Francis. She actually protected John Calvin from being persecuted for his beliefs. Katharina Zell was also an author that wrote about women's role in religion. Katharina von Bora was actually Martin Luther's wife. She agreed with Luther's teachings, but argued with him that the role of women should have more importance in marriage. Roman numeral number 3 talks about how the Catholics responded to the spread of Protestantism with their own version of a Reformation called the Catholic Reformation or Counter-Reformation. It's basically a movement within the church to reform itself. Some of the important leaders were St. Ignatius of Loyola, Pope Paul III, and Pope Paul IV. Let's talk about Ignatius of Loyola. He founded the Jesuit order, which was focused on 3 activities: founding great schools throughout Europe, converting non-Christians to Catholicism, and also stopping the spread of Protestantism by trying to create more Catholics. Capital letter D, talk about some of the popes that led to reform. Paul III directed the Council of Cardinals to investigate the selling of indulgences, so they really wanted to stop that. He actually approved the Jesuit order. They used the Inquisition to seek out heresy and papal authority and called for the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent was where church leaders met in northern Italy to discuss several doctrines which are listed on page 499 in the text. Here are those bullet points. They said that the church's interpretation of the Bible was final, and any Christian who substituted his or her own interpretation was a heretic. Christians needed both faith and good works for salvation. They were not saved through faith alone, as Luther argued. The Bible and the church tradition were equally powerful authorities for guiding Christian life, and indulgences were valid expressions of faith, but the false selling of indulgences was banned. So you could not sell indulgences anymore. Okay, so that was some of the big doctrines coming out of the Council of Trent. We now have Pope Paul IV. He upheld what the council agreed on. He burned all books that were on the forbidden index, which meant that there was a list of books that were found to be heretic or against the teachings of the church. Finally, for Roman numeral 4, the legacy of the Reformation, we'll talk about some of the religious and the social effects. Protestant churches actually began to flourish, and new denominations did develop. The Roman Catholic Church did become more unified due to the Council of Trent. Education for church leaders became an emphasis for all denominations. And the political effects would be that as the power of the Catholic Church declined, the monarchs and states, countries meaning, gained power. And then we had the development of nation states. These are countries that have a common identity and culture.